Good morning from the hello. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by Rob Donaldson. He does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bet Show, and we're going to be chatting with him about the fallout that we have seen with Memphis, with 4 staff members getting the door in the past week and 8 staff members in total this offseason being out of a job. What does that mean for them? How do we take a look at the Big Ten, where it figures to be very parity-driven, just some of the betting angles that could be very beneficial there, and some of the things that go a little bit under the radar. Like, I'm going to be talking about how big elevation is in my handicapping and how teams that play at elevation, like Wyoming, like we're going to be talking quite a bit about BYU. They've made some nice additions here in the offseason, how that could be just such a big advantage with your handicapping as well, and he's got a few helpful tips on that front as well. So hopefully we're going to get you guys some good information there in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, I was searching for some college basketball news, and right now all that I've come across is injury information, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some of the injury information that I've been seeing over the last few days, feed that to you, as most of these are updates from John Rothstein. I will put that out there right now. John Rothstein has been doing a great job on that front, so we'll give the credit where it is due, but also just talk a little bit about how I find a little bit of injury information as well, especially during the season. So we're going to be discussing that here, and if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GNet_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And when it comes to injury information, I do think that it is very big because you still have a few guys that towards the back half of the season last year, they were battling through injuries, and they've got a little bit of question mark, like David Skogman was missing for a little bit of time over at Davidson. He's dealing with a foot issue. I know that John Rothstein reported that he and JJ Traynor for DePaul, they're going to be all good to go. Skogman, someone who was able to register about 5 boards at 6'10", he's able to pop it from 3 at 13.5 points per game over at Davidson last year. That's relatively big to know, and those are always well and good. The guys are good to go. What is important, though, is keeping in mind the guys that aren't, because in all these previews and all of these articles that you're going to be reading about teams for the upcoming season, these top 10 lists, they're not necessarily noting guys like, Tyson Acuff. This was, according to John Rothstein as well, dealing with a little bit of a foot issue, not cleared, and is, and I quote here, getting close, according to Steve Peichel, but that's something where you'll probably want to be making a little bit of a mental note of it, being like, okay, we need to follow up on Tyson Acuff in the next few weeks to make sure that he is good to go, because he had Eastern Michigan last year, averaged 21.7 points per game. Going to Rutgers, probably not going to average 21.7 points per game, but that's something that you do want to be taking a look at, and you do want to say, okay, where are things going to be going there? And I do think that it is very important on the guys that you're going to be selling out for a little bit more, and some of the guys that maybe you're going to let go by the wayside. Like Brendan Napper is someone that's a little bit more borderline. I was doing my WCC conference preview yesterday with Connor Ope, who does absolutely amazing work over at Heat Check CBB, and for Brendan Napper, he was about a 6 to 7 point per game scorer over at Santa Clara. Rothstein, he was reporting that he's all good to go. He's back in basketball activities, so that's something that you do like to see. Someone like a Wesley Yates, this is another one from John Rothstein. He was over at Washington last season, was a very highly touted guy, but could never get out there on the floor. He was injured all last season. He's been reportedly cleared, and he's all good to go. These are the sorts of things that you do want to be taking a look at. We've got a few other ones for you as well. Then this is a big one. Jerome Hunter, who missed all of last season. We do know that he, along with Zach Fremantle, both decided that they were going to be returning to Xavier. Well, they are both now fully cleared. They're all good to go. Fremantle, last we saw him, 15-plus point per game scorer, guy with size that was able to pop it from 3. Hunter, a little bit more of a back-to-the-basket guy. When he last played during the 2022-23 campaign, was able to have some blocks down low, about 4.5 rebounds, 8 points per game, but after Xavier had underwent a few injuries in the back half of the season, he was averaging closer to like 10.6 rebounds per game. So that's something that's very big. Someone like a Cameron Hunter, who missed all of last season over at Central Arkansas, he is all good to go after he averaged 2 seasons ago 17 points, 5 boards, 3 assists per game. Those are some of the major ones, and those are the things that you do want to be taking note of. If you saw a guy that was out last season, you want to make sure that you're able to find out, all right, are they good to go? And there's a few ways of being able to do so. I read off a bunch of updates from John Rothstein. John Rothstein, he does an absolutely incredible job on the injury front, but obviously with John Rothstein, he's looking more at these notable guys. Like, if you were a double-figure scorer in the Big 12, in the Big 10, you're going to get reported upon by John Rothstein. Heck, I know that our good friend Jeff Goodman, he does a great job on that front as well. He was over at Texas's practice a day or two ago. He was reporting that Caden Shedrick, who dealt with injuries all season long, he's looking healthy, he's looking 100%. So those are the things that you do want to be looking for when it comes to, I'm going to call it the nooks and crannies of college basketball. When you're taking a look at someone that's at the low/mid-majors, someone like that, those you want to be, for lack of a better term, going on the old Twitter/X. They've got a search bar, type in the player that's in question. That is the best advice that I can give you, because all of these beat reporters for the big schools and all the small schools, they are over on the Twitter/X. Now, if you can't find a lot in terms of reporters on the old Twitter/X, because there are just some schools out there in the MEAC, the SWAC, the Big South, insert your small conference here, that you're not going to have like a dedicated Presbyterian beat reporter for college basketball. Sorry, Presbyterian, but that's a school that is very, very small. Sometimes you can go on like fan message boards, and sometimes they'll post updates there, but that's once again one of those things where you have to question, is the time spent going to be worth it? Because if you're going on the Presbyterian message board for a guy that averages like 2.5 points per game, boy oh boy, he better be a really, really good glue guy defender. Because if it's like, some guy who's coming off the bench and he's providing 2 points, 10 minutes and 5 fouls, you're probably best to allocate your time to other resources, trying to find other things in terms of handicapping. And injuries are not an end-all, be-all as well. They're certainly very big in college basketball. And you do want to be noting if insert your favorite double-figure scorer here is going to be in or out. But sometimes injuries aren't necessarily the world's worst thing. Like, I still remember when Siena had Javion McCollum, it felt like when Javion McCollum was out, they actually played a little bit better in a few games without him. Like, there are some times where that does happen as well. Like, I still remember the Andre Curbelo situation when he was over at Illinois. I was always jonesing to take Illinois whenever Andre Curbelo was out, and when Andre Curbelo was in, I had trepidations with Illinois. So, I mean, there are guys out there where I actually want to be checking the injury information because he might like that team a little bit more. Like, those are very big rarities. Like the Andre Curbelo one, that's an outlier of outliers, but that is something that you do want to be doing. And when it comes to being able to unearth this information, do question, all right, is it actually worth it to try to see if insert your favorite 2-point per game score is going to be out there? Because there are some things that are and some things that are not. And like I was saying, in terms of the resources that you take a look at for much of this, do be looking on the old Twitter/X and these beat reporters, especially these student beat reporters, a level of media that goes under the radar. They're hardworking kids. They're looking to be able to get jobs in this industry as well. You know that they're putting their best foot forward. You know that they are giving you some relatively good information. Like, I remember I had Evan Applebaum. He does a great job covering UMass Lowell. He hit me up after I was doing my America East Conference preview, being like, hey, these guys are eligible. Those are guys that are very knowledgeable, and those are places where you do want to be looking for injury information, both in the preseason and during the regular season. So hopefully this was able to give you a little bit of enlightenment on that front. If there's something that you'd like me to go in on a little bit more in terms of injury information, or just any topic in college basketball, because we've got a little bit less than 60 days until the start of the college basketball season, and these rosters, they are pretty much set. I'm working through my conference previews, as you heard yesterday. Please do send in a Twitter/X question at GNet_D1. Keep in mind, stay away from the DMs. The letters DM, they mean does not matter, but would like to hear what you guys want to hear on this podcast, because this podcast, it's all about trying to make you guys some money for this upcoming college basketball season, getting you guys set for the upcoming college basketball season, and hopefully a segment like this was able to help you out, and hopefully our next segment will as well. Rob Donaldson, he's a wealth of knowledge with regards to college basketball. We're going to be chatting with him about the Memphis situation. We're going to be chatting a little BYU. We're going to be chatting about just ways to be able to find advantages when it comes to handicapping, home court, elevation, and so much more in college basketball. And that's on the flip side here on Just Good Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family of Podcasts. And we're back to lovely Las Vegas for Just Go Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man as Rob Donaldson. he does a tremendous job on so many different fronts, whether that's taking a look at the great game of baseball. Football is back in our lives, both college and pro. He does a great job handicapping that and so much more. I know that he does great work over at his YouTube feed, youtube.com/Rob Donaldson, and you're able to get everything that he's betting over on his Twitter/X feed at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And certainly, like you said, we are juggling a bunch of different sports right now, and a lot of it on the college front where it's just a conglomeration of just the NIL, college football expansion, new conferences, and yeah, there's a lot of excitement going around.
There is a lot of excitement, and we are getting set as we're less than 2 months away from the start of the college basketball season. In my opinion, it can't come soon enough, but when it comes to this team, they're going to need to rebuild their staff on the fly as Memphis let go of 4 staffers, including Slick Rick Stansberry, one of their main assistants. And just how do you take a look at this Memphis team? Because I'm not one that puts like a massive amount of stock into like assistant coaches or anything like that, but I take a look at things in Memphis, a team that it just feels like they have done less with more over the last few years, and it just leads me to just going further down the hole of thinking that this Penny Hardaway experiment just isn't working out the world's greatest.
Yeah, and there's a number of different things you can say about the Penny Hardaway era, but the fact that we're constantly having to talk about them in this kind of light of, no allegations so far, just the random firings, but I think it's obviously very telling that something is going down, and ultimately, you just have to have a head coach with experience, and he has to be able to earn it through his coaching pedigree, not through just his, former alumni, player status, and that's like where I think Memphis went disastrously wrong here, and I don't think Penny Hardaway was ever up for this task, and now it's really kind of looking like it's rearing its ugly head.
And how do you feel about many of these former players that do become coaches? Because there are some cases where things work out swimmingly, and then we saw it with Chris Mullen back in the day when he was over at St. John's. We've seen Reggie Theus have a few goes at it where it's not necessarily been so tremendous, and with Penny Hardaway, he's done a great job recruiting. Like, these are guys that Memphis probably wouldn't be able to get otherwise, but at the end of the day, you and I think we'll both agree, it's all about getting wins, even though you get flash. It doesn't mean anything if you're losing to, say, East Carolina in the conference, because when it comes down to it, the goal should always be to hang banners, not necessarily hang banners when it comes to the recruiting front, but actually on the court.
Yeah, and ultimately that's where I think the biggest line is drawn because, to your point, Penny Hardaway has brought in a lot of talent to Memphis, and that's because they have a great platform, they have a great program of stability, and they have a great NIL package to offer, and certainly some of the questionable, potentially illegal sort of things that have gone on during his tenure as well have certainly helped that, but I really will always believe in, hey, you've got to earn it at the college level. You got to prove your X's and O's stature. And those are, I think, the most consistently proven and successful coaches when they're making the jump to the high major level. And yeah, we'll see, in Ohio State, right, this year with a guy like Diebler. And, he did coach at Ohio State level as an assistant coach, and that certainly built up some knowledge base. But it's one of those things where I feel like they were just kind of too gung-ho on going outside of the box, and it really has not panned out in any kind of good way.
Nope, not at all. And for Ohio State, I think that they're going to be an interesting team this year because they're one of the few teams out there in the Big Ten that I feel like has fully embraced the transfer portal, and I feel like they got a good blend of guys in there. I'm not sure how you take a look at the Big Ten, but I was talking about this with one of our good friends, Rocco Miller, a few days ago, and I look at the entirety of the conference, and I don't necessarily see that one dominant team. If I had to put a team at number one right now, it would be Purdue, but I don't know if there's a single top 10 team in the Big Ten. I don't know if there's a team that's really outside of like number 75, number 80 in this conference either, as it just feels like there's a bunch of jammed up teams that, for lack of a better term, it's going to come down to the final possession in so many of these games.
Yeah, and that's where I think the Big Ten is going to be very, very fun. Maybe not the best league from just an overall talent standpoint, but there's going to be every single time out, every single given night, I think there's going to be a lot of parity, and I also think the travel distances are going to be coming into play, especially in college basketball, and when you're also talking about, high upside, there are a lot of teams in this league that I think have that high upside billing, and you have a lot of continuity, even, at some of these programs as well. So it's going to be one of those things where I think every single night we're getting good basketball. And at the very end of it, in typical Big Ten fashion, there's going to be a massive clump, except this year, I feel like there's not going to be a real separating team at the top.
Yep, I am right there with you. As joining me on the show, we've got Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the Rob's Best Bet Show, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Rob, when it comes to that Big Ten, how much do you want to be taking a look at just what has been tried and true in that conference? Home teams and underdogs, because I feel like that's ultimately what it's going to be coming down to. Because I do think that when it comes to this season, there's not a lot of times where a team should be some sort of double figure favorite, and you just mentioned it as well. The travel, it is brutal in the Big Ten. These fans, they come out, they support, whether it's your top of the top teams or if it's your bottom of the bottom. Every single one of these fan bases are very, very rowdy. They get after it. And I think that those are going to be such big keys to be able to handicap this conference, which makes me very fired up to bet it this year.
Yeah, and from a college basketball standpoint, as opposed to like a college football, sport, the turnaround time between games is a lot shorter, and you're kind of in the middle of all this travel, and you can get jet lagged if you're going on a long road trip, and that's where I feel like with these distances of, Oregon all the way out to Maryland and Washington all the way out to, Rutgers, I think those are the kind of the dynamics that the Big Ten is really only providing to this degree. And because of that, I think the Big Ten is just going to be a completely different feel. I think it's going to be a completely different look. And so a lot of these historical trends, I'm personally going to take the stance of just kind of bucking them, and I'm going to play it game by game. I'm going to let the story tell itself, and ultimately, I think we're going to get a new, exciting version of the Big Ten moving forward.
Oh, I think that it's going to be an awesome Big Ten this year. I think that we are going to be in for an absolutely tremendous year, and I think the same for the Big 12 as well. Other than Arizona, I think that some of those teams coming in are not necessarily going to be amazing or anything like that, but I just take a look up and down at the Big 12, and I think that it's going to be much like we were talking about in the Big 10 with so many road trips, with having a team like BYU having to travel all the way out to West Virginia, much like a season ago. And I do feel like when it comes to a lot of these power conferences, that is going to be the name of the game, taking a look at travel time, taking a look at schedules, and it's going to give bettors just such a nice advantage when you're aware of some of those things that sometimes gets a little bit lost when you just take a look at the matchup itself.
Yeah, and from a product standpoint, I think the Big 12 has the strongest product because every single home environment feels like a true home environment where there's a legitimate edge at play. UCF is probably the weakest, and even they have a pretty decent home court advantage despite me hating the design of their court. And when you are looking at the Big 12 as a product as well, they do have those solidified top teams that are going to be the juggernaut battles that we're going to see, whether it's Houston going up against Kansas or Arizona or Iowa State or Baylor, and even Texas Tech is starting to get back in the fold there too. What a fun league. What a bunch of talent in that league. And even though there are going to be some clear teams that I think are going to be sitting at the bottom, those bottom teams in the Big 12, I don't think are too bad either.
No, I don't think so either. And when it comes to Big 12, I think one of the most curious teams is going to be BYU, because BYU, we saw them a few days ago pick up the gentleman that was the under-20 FIBA European MVP in Mihailo Boskovic. Hopefully I said that correctly. 6'10" gentleman that's able to pop it from three. And we've been seeing it out of Kevin Young, someone that was at the professional level last year. He was an assistant for the Phoenix Suns. And I think that that's going to bring a different dynamic to BYU, where they're doing things a little bit differently than a lot of other college basketball teams. And when you pair that up with a tremendous home court, I think that it could yield some very good results for them in a conference that, as we know, you need to do something special to be able to emerge.
And ultimately, I'm going to take a pessimistic angle on BYU personally because, obviously the coaching turnover is huge, but also when you're living and dying by the three-point jumper like they were last year, that also strikes a little bit of pessimism in me if you haven't been able to consistently replicate that. And now you're bringing in new staff. They had a lot of player turnover. I could be standing to prove wrong because, this is going to be a entirely different look BYU squad. I think they're probably going to do it in a different style. And from that standpoint, I kind of want them to prove it to me before I jump on the bandwagon.
Yep, when it comes to BYU, you do want to see it a little bit more, but I do think that when it comes to BYU as well, they do have a little bit more of, shall we say, a ceiling than a lot of these other teams in the Big 12, because as we know in the Big 12, it is oh so brutal, and when you're able to stand out in a way with like BYU has been able to here in the offseason, season. I do think that if it goes wrong, it could go very, very wrong. But if it goes right, they could be able to hit big and be a little bit of a contender where, again, you just need to, in my opinion, do something different in order to be able to knock off these great teams like Kansas and Iowa State who have proven over the last few years that they've got a tried and true style.
Oh, absolutely. I think you have to go for it if you're one of those middling or bottom teams, because if you don't, you're just going to be irrelevant. You're probably not even going to make the NIT. Maybe you'll make the NIT, and is that really a successful season in your books? I feel like that would be a cowardly approach to take, if you're wanting to compete at this high of a level. And, especially, a Colorado or a BYU that has a legitimate, home court advantage, not just from a loudness and fan edge, but also just the actual environment that you're in. I think you got to be able to utilize that and push the pace and get acclimated to that style and really abuse it when teams come to your building.
Absolutely, and I think that you hit on something so good there as well as Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the Rob's Best Bet show, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. I always love taking a look at games involving teams at elevation at home. Certainly, it hasn't necessarily been the world's most savory for a team like Idaho State. The talent is just lacking there. But Wyoming is always one of those teams. We know that they've been down the last few years, but bringing in Sundance Wicks is big. As we know, going to places like Utah, Colorado, BYU, these places where they're in mountainous sort of country, I think that that's so big. And I'm not sure how you take a look at home court advantage, but whether you got fans in the stands or not, just going to elevation, I think, is always something that is so big. And I just put in much higher regard in my handicapping than I feel like most do.
Pun intended, but they really do elevate, a team when they're playing at home in that altitude. Because to your point, and we kind of brought it up with the Big Ten travel, but if you're playing a lot of games in succession and there's short turnaround times, you're going to still feel sore. You're going to still feel a little bit fatigued after a couple games in a row. And if you have to play a couple games up in Utah and then Colorado, and, a big one that I've always been a fan of at the mid-major level is Northern Colorado and Greenlee, because they always get it done at home. And there's definitely an edge there that you have to acknowledge if you're going to be betting in this space. And absolutely. What helps is, certainly if there are fans in the stadium, but there don't really need to be if you're kind of neutralizing the fan edge from one side to the other. And that's where I think a lot of profitability can be found.
No doubt about it. That's one thing that I always take a look at in terms of my handicap. And is there anything that you take a look at in terms of your handicap that you feel like sometimes maybe people are overlooking a little bit, but it plays a big role for you, much like I do with elevation?
One of the definitely things that I take a look at is the back end of road trips, right? After, maybe you can sneak off that first one because you feel fresh and you're ready to go. And even, the second one, sometimes veteran teams that have depth can sometimes escape without really looking or showing that fatigue from a long travel trip. But it's that third one on the back end of a long road trip that can get teams because they're in uncomfortable territory night after night. And although they can potentially acclimate, more often than not, what we see is, hey, we just need some rest. We're not playing our A game and just kind of playing the averages of, if they play 2 good games on the road in a row, that third one is probably going to bite them a little bit.
Yep, and I think that is so important to do as well because, as we know, with 18 to 22-year-olds, granted, now we've got a lot more 23 and 24-year-olds as well, consistency is very difficult. I recall being a college kid, going to class day in and day out. Consistency was not something that I was great at as well, so glad that you bring that up, Rob. And Rob, I always love to ask you this question because you, much like myself, getting set for the upcoming season, as you've been doing your research, as you've been data mining and trying to get set for the upcoming season, has there been a team or two that has been jumping out at you, whether that be to the positive or the negative? Because sometimes things can jump out to the negative, like I'm looking at you, Memphis, canning all of your staffers over the past week or so, but is there a team that all of a sudden you've just had a little bit of a change of heart on over the last week or two?
Well, not really a change of heart, but as I'm starting to kind of still, feed through the portal and kind of learn, what these new rosters are going to look like and these new coaching staffs, I'm starting to get down to those mid-major tiers and Leon Rice and Boise State. I know that we've been trying to hype them up for years now because they've had a lot of promise on the roster year after year for the past couple of years. But this year, I do feel like with so many seniors back, with some additions in the portal, that they do have a roster that's worth respecting and a roster that can get it done in the Mountain West and really produce at a high level. And so although Boise State has had some good seasons recently, I feel like this could be one that really breaks through the seal.
I do think that that's a good look, and I do think that that is a team that is going to be able to bust through, and I think that they're in very good position, just like this show is always in great position to have success. When you're aboard, Rob, you do a great job taking a look at the game of basketball, and now I know you're doing a great job in terms of handicapping baseball, in terms of handicapping football as well. So love to give people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, always appreciate you having me on, man. You're one of the best in this industry, and certainly you're bringing knowledge to the table every single time out. And for those who are wanting to, follow my bets on a daily basis, whether that's baseball, college football, or NFL, or college basketball when the season starts back up, you can do so on Twitter/X at RobDFB. And as always, Greg, really appreciate having me on.
Always appreciate Rob, as he's such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to taking a look at this great game of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, we all get a little bit smarter. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at June_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Very much continuing on with the conference previews. We've got the WAC to do, and then we get into the Atlantic 10, the American, and the Power Conferences. So we are starting to get there on these conference previews, and once we do those, we are going to be set for an amazing college basketball season, and I will be with you guys every single day here on this podcast, all 366 days of the year, regular season and off season, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.